Read this sentence. However, rapid technological advancements render hardware, physical computing devices, and operating systems, software needed to run programs, out of date, which makes it difficult for individuals to access old computer programs and associated data files. By the way, sometimes reading to yourself helps give you an idea of what's going on in this sentence, because in this sentence in particular, we're going to have to sort of get an assessment and figure out exactly kind of what is going on. What do I have here? I have, how should the sentence be revised? That is the underlined portion of the sentence. Systems, comma, software needed to run programs. Well, do I just leave that without punctuation? And operating system software needed to run programs, out of date. Why would that closing parentheses be there? That doesn't seem to work, A. I have a closing parentheses. I must have an opening parentheses. Over here, I open and close parentheses. So if I close parentheses, and by the way, we can't change it because it's not the portion of the sentence that might be revised. Only those underlined portions are. I have closing, therefore I must have an opening parentheses. So A is going to be wrong. By the way, D is going to be wrong too. I must have an opening parentheses. Why are they wrong as well? Notice I have a comma or a long dash. Those are substitute parenthetical punctuations to parentheses. I could basically interchange parentheses, commas, long dashes in many cases. But be careful, you never mix parenthetical punctuations. I don't open with a long dash, as in D, and close with a parentheses after programs. I don't open with a comma here after systems and close with the parentheses. That's not acceptable. So again, another reason why what you see here is wrong and D is wrong. And A is not quite right because it doesn't even have a parentheses. All right, so the answer is going to be B or C. What's the difference? One has a comma before it, one does not. So what we're doing is here, we're separating software needed to run programs as a separate parenthetical, which means it's adding information to something. Well, what? To operating systems before it. Just like physical computing devices is adding information, telling you what the hardware is. Hardware is physical computing devices. So operating systems here in a parallel structure are software needed to run programs, which if you know anything about computers, you probably already put that together and realized that. Okay? So we definitely have the parentheses before software. Now the question is, do I need a comma before that? Well, generally we don't. If I had a comma before it, means there's a whole nother parenthetical separated by commas on both sides, maybe out to here. But that doesn't make any sense. Software needed to run programs, out of date. No, that out of date is an important part of the sentence. Remember, if it's set off parenthetically, I can pull it out of the sentence. I cannot pull that out of date out of the sentence. If I did, it would read something like, advancements render hardware and operating systems, which makes it difficult for individuals. No, it renders operating systems out of date, which makes it difficult for individuals. So I don't need the comma there. There's no other second parenthetical going on here. That's a little bit tricky part, but it's simply going to be systems, parentheses, and then closing parentheses. Why is that comma here, by the way? This comma here is to set off the ending dependent clause with our relative pronoun which on other questions we've learned almost always takes a comma before it. That's why this comma here. It's not to set off the back side of a dependent clause separated by commas in the middle of the sentence. So now we understand why this comma is here. It has nothing to do with answer B. The correct answer again here is C. Now, that might be more information than you wanted to know to analyze this problem, but this problem is a little tricky. We do have to figure out what's going on, and there are a few different issues at play. So if you really have a good understanding of all of them working together, you are in excellent shape for the grammar section. Read this sentence. Both men recognize that many individuals may not have access to older computer programs and their required software, comma, so they develop OLIVE, Open Library of Images for Virtualized Execution, an executable content archive. Which revision corrects the error in sentence structure in the paragraph? replace the comma after software with a comma after so. No, I don't want to put the comma after so. I want the comma before so. Why? Because we're combining independent clauses here. So I need a comma with my for, in, nor, but, or, yet, so. One of my fanboys, coordinating conjunctions. The first part, both men recognize many individuals may not have access to older computer programs. That's an independent clause. After it, they developed Olive, an executable software archive. That's an independent clause, a standalone sentence. So it must be comma fanboy or comma so. E is correct. There's no reason to revise that. Change THEY apostrophe RE to THEIR. Okay, where is that? Right here. So what's the difference between these two? They're what we call homophones. THEY apostrophe S is actually a contraction. Whenever you see apostrophes with pronouns, it's contractions. It means they are. And programs, they are required software. That's not right. That's not what's going on here. This is possessive. THEIR is possessive plural. So this should read, individuals may not have access to older computer programs and their THEIR required software, which means they own the software. That's correct. It is THEIR for plural possessive. Let's just check G and H. Replace there with its ITS or replace there with its IT apostrophe S. So again, you might think IT apostrophe S is possessive. It's not. Remember, pronouns with apostrophes are never possessive. Only regular nouns are. If there's an apostrophe in a pronoun, it's a contraction. IT apostrophe S means it is. Okay, so that's not the possessive one. G would be the singular possessive. So wait, is this singular possessive? Is the antecedent noun to the pronoun here plural or singular? In choosing F, I assumed it was plural, but let's just check to make sure it's not singular. They, the ones who own the software, refers back to whom or what? They refers back to programs, the computer programs. It's the required software owned or possessed by the computer programs. It could be individuals, which could make this pronoun vague. But if that were the case, then computer programs would be possessive too. It would be their computer programs. So it doesn't say that. So that implies to me the computer programs own the required software. Read this paragraph. Which sentence contains an error in its construction and should it be revised? Okay. Both men recognize that many individuals may not have access to older computer programs and the required software, so they developed Olive, Open Library of Images for Virtualized Execution, an executable content archive. Olive has two main purposes. First, it contains software that enables a modern computer to simulate all the software of an older computer. Users stream the software over the internet to their newer electronic devices, and which allows them to access obsolete computer programs in order to retrieve associated data files. Second, Olive functions as a free digital archive of outdated computer programs that individuals can use for education and research purposes. Where is the problem? Well, on reading it, and again, I suggest you read it aloud to yourself, I can almost zero in immediately on where the problem is. To me, the problem was right down here. And which didn't read right. I think it should have been comma which. But that's my hunch. That's my gut feel from reading. By the way, you have years of experience reading, writing, and speaking English. That is very useful experience. Make sure you use it positively. Let's now dig into the rules and see if that first gut instinct was correct from reading it aloud to myself. Number one, both men recognize that many individuals may not have access to all required software, comma, so, well, there's two independent clauses being combined, so that's fine. The parentheses here is fine. It's telling you what Olive, O-L-I-V-E, stands for. And then we have a final dependent clause separated by a comma here in executable content archive. Thumbs up on number one. It's Good sentence. Number 2, Olive has 2 main purposes, colon. First, it contains software that enables a modern computer. So colons are usually followed by examples, in many cases a list, or explanations of what came before the colon. So what's the main purpose of Olive? Well, first, it's to enable a computer to simulate old software from an old computer. That makes sense. That's a good use of a colon. Now, there are other uses as well. Sometimes we see quotes and or questions. Oftentimes they are explanations as well, but that's how we mainly use colons. They're examples or explanations of what came before it. Number 3. So thumbs up on number 2, by the way. Number 3. Users stream this software over the internet to their newer electronic devices. Okay, so far that's an independent clause. It stands alone. Comma and. So that suggests the next part will be an independent clause as well, because the only time we really see the comma and, well, other than in a serial comma of a list of 1, 2, and 3, a list of 3 or more, is when we combine independent clauses. That's when we see this. So there must be an independent clause to follow if this is correct punctuation, which allows them to access obsolete computer programs in order to retrieve associated data files. That is not a standalone sentence. Read it to yourself. Does it complete a thought? No, it does not. By the way, no, it doesn't, because it begins with which, one of my 4 main dependent clause types. It's a relative pronoun. It cannot stand by itself. By the way, which almost always takes a comma beforehand. So what I need to do, if I were to correct this, they're not asking me to, I would take out the and. And that's what read awkwardly when I read it in the first place. So the correct answer here is going to be sentence 3. Let's quick check number 4. Second, Olive functions as a free digital archive of outdated computer programs that individuals can use for education. That's perfectly fine. Nothing special about that. No need to change it. Sentence 3 is the sentence that contains the error. The correct answer is C. Read this sentence. How should the sentence be revised? This program was created by history professor David Miller in the late 1980s, comma, to help students engage critically with U.S. history. So what are our choices? E. Add commas before and after David Miller to set apart the name of the professor. So this program was created by history professor, comma, David Miller, comma, in the late 1980s. Okay, that to many students might seem like a real possible answer. We'll come back and explain why it's not correct. Let's just keep going for a second. Remove the comma after 1980s. So in the late 1980s, comma, to help college students. So one might be confused to think this is a parenthetical at the end, a dependent clause that needs to be separated by commas, a comma at the end. Not actually. This is the infinitive, to help. So when we use the infinitive, to run, to walk, to help, if you take a foreign language course, you're probably familiar with what that is, we don't put commas before it. So it looks to me like F is going to be the thing that needs to be changed here. It's going to be the correct answer. Let's just look at the other options again. G, add a semicolon after 1980. So change the comma to a semicolon. Again, that's not going to be correct because we are not combining independent clauses. This clause after the what would be the semicolon is now the comma. That would read, to help college students engage critically with U.S. history. It doesn't complete a thought. I can't make it a sentence. What happens to help college students engage critically with history? So when I'm left asking that question, I know I'm not completing the thought. G is wrong. How about H, a colon? So remember, the colon follows with examples or explanations of what's before the colon. So is this part to help college students engage critically with U.S. history? Is that an explanation of something beforehand? The program was created. Well, it kind of is an explanation of why the program was created. But again, there's no need for a colon to precede an infinitive. So we would not use a colon in this case. Let's quick jump back to E. We know the answer is F, but we didn't fully explain why E is wrong. Add commas before and after David Miller, because this is a separate topic called appositives. And a positive is when we have a subject, or two subjects really, that are basically the same one subject. My sister, Linda. Linda is my sister. That's the same person. The super fast race car, the red Ferrari. The red Ferrari is the super fast race car. So we have to apply our comma rules in these cases. We have to decide, do I put commas around the second element, the appositive, in the list? The first part is the history professor. Here, the history professor is David Miller. Do I separate David Miller by commas? The answer is no, I do not. You might think so, but in this case, it's essential to say David Miller. Therefore, we don't use commas under our comma rules for restrictive or essential information. It's identifying the person, David Miller. I said he was a history professor at the beginning of the sentence. Well, there are many history professors. I don't know which one I'm talking about until I say or identify David Miller by name, which means this part is essential. No commas needed. If I did it the other way around, by the way, I would need commas. If I said this program was created by David Miller, history professor in the late 1980s, I would have to separate history professor on both sides by commas. Why? Because I already identified in the first part who I'm talking about, David Miller. The fact that he's a history professor then becomes extra information. It becomes non-restrictive, and I separate it by commas. So appositives get a little complicated that way. Not really, once you know the rules. One trick is to say if it's profession, then name, no commas. If it's name, then profession, separate the second part by commas. Okay? So maybe that'll help in the future if you run into this. Long story there. E is not the correct answer. There's no change required here. F is the correct answer.